Welcome back to the Bandwich Tapes. I'm Brad Williams, and today I'm joined by principal percussionist of the San Francisco Symphony, Jake Nissly. And this is a conversation that goes way beyond sticks and mallets. We talk about the reality of orchestral auditions, the pressure of playing behind a screen, the discipline it takes to prepare, and what it feels like to win a job, and then lose one. Jake shares his journey through Detroit, Cleveland, and ultimately San Francisco, a path shaped by resilience, humility, and a lot of hard-earned perspective. How drum set playing and drum corps training shape orchestral musicianship. How bolero has a pocket. How feel matters just as much as perfection. This is an honest, thoughtful look at what it takes to build a life in music. Here's my conversation with Jake Nissly. Jake, welcome to the podcast. How are things going today?
Things are going great. Thanks for having me on.
I've been a fan of your playing for a long time. Watch every video and listen to every recording I can. I'm just blown away by your skill and your musicianship and all of the things that you do. So it's a pleasure to get to chat with you.
Oh, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So we'll just end it right there. We'll just say that's all. We'll talk. As you were telling me before we started recording, you have a light week with the orchestra, thanks to some Mozart programming.
Yeah, it's I honestly wish we were playing that repertoire. I love Mozart, but as you know, unless it's the abduction from the Seraglio, I'm not playing any triangle or playing any cymbals or doing much at all. So it's the Requiem this week, which is I'm sure going to be a beautiful presentation, but taking advantage of a little bit of extra time off to work on other projects, of course.
Yeah, sure. What does a typical week look like for you? Because I know you wear many hats with the orchestra, but also as a teacher. What does your schedule normally look like?
The orchestra schedule varies. Certainly there's kind of a template that we follow where Monday is typically free, almost always from the orchestra. I think most of my colleagues have it that way in American orchestras too. But I'd say, I teach pretty much 4 or 5 days a week. Depending upon the week with the symphony, I'm in there for 3 or 4 rehearsals and then 3 or 4 concerts. A week like this where we don't have the orchestra, I'm just simply practicing, getting opportunity to do stuff like this. I'm also my son's Little League head baseball coach. And so that starts today. So that's where I'm off to after this. It's our first practice of the season. So, I run the percussion department at the Conservatory, San Francisco Conservatory of Music. I am the co-director of the percussion ensemble with Haruka Fuji, my great colleague. And this is my 13th season at the Symphony. So I feel very fortunate to have these opportunities here in the Bay Area and get to make music with amazing percussion and timpani colleagues in the symphony. Very, very happy, very fortunate.
Yeah. I guess the most important question is, I know you grew up in Iowa, but now you live in San Francisco. So which baseball team do you typically follow in Major League Baseball?
Oh,
are you a Giants fan?
That's pretty easy right here.
Okay,
I got my
there you go.
Got my my Cubs notes. I'm still a diehard Cubs fan. Growing up, during all those years of agony, and everyone in my family was a Cubs fan. My son is not a Cubs fan; he's a Giants fan.
Okay,
so that makes sense. So I'm not trying to influence him in any way.
Yeah,
but
you'll be pleased to know I live in St. Louis, but I am a Braves fan, so I'm not a Cardinals fan. Yeah, I didn't want you to end this call early, so
I was going to say that might have been the end right there, but nah. You know what? It's all good. Of course, the Cardinals are the rivals, but I just love baseball, and I didn't play beyond high school, but it's fun to kind of get back into it now. He'll get to an age. He's only 8, so in a couple more years, I think we'll have the more specialized coaches that take over, and I'll go back to spectating. So yeah, a typical week is busy, is what I would say.
You're busy. Yeah. You have a lot going on. Does the orchestra typically program a contemporary piece, something romantic? Do you find they kind of, and by contemporary, probably something that's going to lean a little heavier on your work as a percussionist? Does the schedule kind of vary in that respect?
I wouldn't say there's any pattern to that. So I've made the analogy talking to people before about the job being akin to a fireman. Sometimes you'll be sitting around not doing a whole lot, and then some weeks come up that are just crazy and you're on it. Just a couple weeks ago, I had a good friend out, Doug Perkins from the University of Michigan, new music specialist, and we put together in 2 rehearsals the Poe movement from Xenakis' Pleiad, and that was a part of the symphony's Soundbox series, which is a pretty heavy piece. But, on the union time clock, we got 2 rehearsals. Obviously, we rehearsed ourselves a lot the months leading up to that. But, that was sandwiched between, I think I had another week in there that was pretty light, or maybe only played the first, So, yeah, it can be feast or famine. You've got weeks like this, which are really amazing music, just the percussion's not involved at all, In fact, last week was 2 Beethoven symphonies, and if it's not 9, we're not utilized either. So, so I would say that is atypical. We play a lot here. I would say over the years in my time here, percussion has been very heavily utilized. Michael Tilson-Thomas and Esa-Pekka Salonen, the 2 music directors under whom I've played, are both, incredibly advanced in their knowledge of percussion. They both write really well for percussion. They both value percussion. There were, it was always, it's always been fairly heavy for me. So this is maybe the first season where I've had like a back-to-back, even these 2, I'm just thinking out loud, honestly, where I had 2 weeks in a row where I wasn't playing, So it's not like, it's not safari vacation time. I'm preparing to play Andy Kehoe's percussion concerto in April over in Germany, which is a whole other thing. I'm doing a little, I've done some percussion soloist work in the last few years, touring Adam Schoenberg's Concerto Losing Earth to a few different places, stuff that, quite frankly, I didn't anticipate. I'm very fortunate and happy to be doing it. I wouldn't say that that's, it wasn't necessarily a goal of mine, but Michael Tilson-Thomas was the reason that commission came about. And then that piece has been picked up by other orchestras, and I've had the opportunity to play it. And so have some of my other friends. My good friend Joe Petrosic played it in Atlanta Symphony. But, now getting the chance to play Andy's piece, who is a really good friend of mine, and I really just my drum corps background and his drum corps background, a lot of his writing, sometimes it's kind of like cracking a code. I look at it for a couple of days and I'm like, oh, it's this. I'm like, oh, that's just that lick. We all know that lick, I'm not reducing his music to that. I'm just saying there's a language familiarity when I play his music that is really fun. So, it's a couple of weeks off, but it's just really allowed me the chance to dig in and practice unlike I could normally. So
yeah, it has to be wonderful though that I would imagine you get to feel creative in so many different respects, and you get to, not showing up and setting everything up week after week. You get to do lots of different things, from teaching to chamber music to solo performing. I mean, what an amazing career you're getting to have.
Yes, I couldn't be, I couldn't be happier. On top of that, my first true love, I was just a drum set player, a drummer. My dad was a rock and roll drummer in the Midwest. I get to play a lot of the drum set with the symphony too, whether it's La La Land, where you're actually playing some, Peter Erskine style jazz drums, or, just rocking out in Barbie or some of the movies that we play. It's just fun to get to do that too, because, and if I'd gone a different direction after Northwestern, I could have seen myself being a drummer, just a, show drummer, touring drummer, studio work drummer, whatever. I think that was an avenue that I definitely considered strongly after I graduated my undergrad. So yeah, I mean, yes, I feel super fortunate to get to do all this stuff.
Are many principal percussionists carrying the drum set responsibility with the orchestra therein? I don't feel like that happens. I feel like you're a rare commodity to do that as well as be the principal in the orchestra. What
I can say is it's changing. You're seeing more of that. I think that used to be unheard of. But someone I just mentioned, who, great friend of mine, amazing percussionist, Joe Petrosic, who's the principal down in Atlanta. He is an incredibly gifted drum set player. He does the same thing I do. I can't think out loud because I don't know exactly the situation in every orchestra. I think that that's becoming more common, and you are starting to see, for sure, drum set creep its way into many orchestral percussion auditions. It used to be you'd see it for sure for something like, President's Own or one of the great military groups. You have to play some drum set, and now we're starting to see it in the major orchestras. Which to me, okay, it seems like I think that I understand why I understand that there has been a bit of a compartmentalization, for lack of a better word, in the past, but I don't teach that way for my undergraduate students or graduate students, but for sure the undergraduate students. It's a huge part of my backbone. It's something I tap into all the time, even when I was taking orchestral percussion auditions. I could frame it through the lens of a drum set player, of keeping time, of, feeling big beat time, all these things. And, the key word there being the feeling, right? And not necessarily just intellectualizing it, but like the feel you get. On top of that, the drum line, all the drum, I did only one summer at DCI, but I did plenty of marching band. And that one summer is enough steps, I think, to get it in you for a lifetime. You really feel it when you're actually physically moving. I can see correlation to dance historically is pretty obvious there. And so, I don't think it's super common yet, but I think that is changing for sure.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I had to quickly tell you so I grew up in Atlanta, and my son and I were both fortunate to study with Jack Bell back in the day in Atlanta. And then my son wound up going to LSU, studying with Brett Dietz, who I think was at Northwestern when you were there, right? Maybe I think he's a few years older than you, but
yes. good story there, in fact. But I love Brett. So
yeah. That, and funny enough, 2 or 3 weeks from now, I'm scheduled to have a conversation with Michael Burritt himself. So just making my way through the lineage of the Northwestern Percussion Studio.
There you go. Yeah, Burritt is going to be out here in April to play third construction with me and a couple of my colleagues. It'll be the first time to truly perform with him professionally. And so, we could spend the next 30 minutes talking about him and the impact he had, but suffice it to say, I would say he's probably the reason I'm doing this at this level, kind of being a little bit clueless coming out of Iowa. I was looking at Northwestern primarily for academics, just because I knew it was a great academic school. I had applied as an economics major and a music major, and I showed up and auditioned for him. I should backtrack. I met him the summer before my senior year, totally randomly, because I wanted to go to a summer music camp. I didn't want to march drum corps. I had done the Jamie Ebersol jazz camp the summer before, which was pretty cool. And I wanted to do some sort of percussion camp. And I was really, really into Pat Metheny group, still am. And I was, Paul Wertico is the drummer. Oh man, he teaches at Northwestern. That's really cool. I really want to go to Northwestern. Maybe I could, And so I showed up that summer sort of thinking I might get to meet Paul Wertico. And he wasn't a part of the summer percussion symposium, but Michael Burritt was, and we hit it off immediately. I was very raw, maybe, you could ask him, I don't know. Famously, fast forward 6 months later, I took a lot of what he said to me that summer, implemented it. I'm hoping he saw that in my audition. He asked me to sight read mallets. I literally could not do it, almost burst into tears. I remember I tell my students this to this day. I'm not sure if he remembers it. I think, the rest of my audition was good enough to get in at a time when Northwestern was really competitive. Still is. But it was, he really set the course for what I'm doing now. And, I model so much of my teaching after him and what he does and the way that he fosters a community, every single year, the way that he can tailor his teaching to an individual student, the way that he's good at everything, he touches. He's an amazing drum set player. Clearly, if you've ever seen him play mudra, he's got snare drum chops that can hang with anybody. And everyone knows him as a marimba player. So that speaks for itself. But yeah, my freshman class, Dave Skidmore and I came in together, member of Third Coast Percussion. And we also hit it off, and great friends to this day. We pushed each other a lot. People like Brett Dietz, people like Will James, if you're in St. Louis, a lot of these people that I was in school with that, Annie Stevens, Chris Keaton, just Eric Hollenbeck, Peter Martin. All the Third Coast guys, all these, it was quite the collection in just those 4 years that I was there. Matt Coley, right? Really a lot of great players that came through there. And it was it was the right vibe, yeah. So I can't say enough about him.
It's just amazing, that lineage of the people that he has managed to influence, mentor, and just that have gone on to do incredible things in the world of music. That, like yourself, it's incredible to me to think about who all Michael has influenced. It's incredible. Yeah. And you'll be proud to know, by the way, that my son's middle name is Metheny, named after Pat. and wow. Paul Wertico was on the podcast. So yeah, it was, I'm right there with you about Pat Metheny, man. I'm right there with you.
This is, we have a lot in common, then. That's awesome.
Yeah. For me, I don't know what it was for you, but funny enough, DCI is the reason why I'm a Pat Metheny fan, because I heard the Crossman Metheny show, and that was it for me.
92 or 91. Yeah, exactly.
That was it. That was what it did it for me.
Saying a cross between that, and this is I once teased Paul about this in a lesson. I hope he doesn't remember this, and he didn't think it was funny either, but it's terrible. I said, man, I heard you last night. He was like, oh, I wasn't playing. I was like, no, I was watching the Weather Channel. And I was watching because growing up in Iowa, my mom was really into storm. Like she had like the storm radio, and like there was like a hyper awareness, in the springtime around tornadoes and whatever. And so the Weather Channel would be on, and like they used to play like First Circle a lot, like on heavy rotation as one of the tunes. And I was like, man, this is I was like, okay, the Weather Channel, whatever, but this music's kind of cool on here. Where'd this come from? So
yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
What was his reaction to that? Was he pissed off, or was he like, okay?
I don't think he was never pissed off. I mean, he was just sort of like, whatever. Okay, good.
Yeah.
He's like, all right, then play the thing I told you to do.
Yeah. He seems pretty laid back. Yeah. I remember seeing this. I saw a video one time about there was some guy that worked for the Weather Channel who was a big jazz fan, and his job was just to program the music, and he put all of his
I would love to see
artists
this
on there. Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. I'll send it to you.
That's like weirdly vivid memories for me of, that was like the TV was kind of like always on in the side room that we had that on like a low volume, just like the repeat radar just going, it's showing you.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And like that music was kind of always coming from that room, and I'd stop in there sometimes and be like, man, I dig this. Okay, this is cool.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I got hip to Metheny. I was a big Yellow Jackets, Will Kennedy fan back then, and still am. And I remember hearing all that stuff back in that period, and just like, whoa, those tunes, man, they're still in there. I just remember hearing them all those years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm. How old were you when you won your first principal job? I mean, it's pretty remarkable to me that you won 3 jobs fairly young, right? I mean, you were pretty young when that happened.
Yeah. Yes, that was all in about a 3-year span, actually.
Wow.
3 years. How old was I? In 26 when I won the first job. So, yeah, I mean, I'd been to New World. I was in my second year down at the New World Symphony in Miami Beach. People that don't know, it's amazing training orchestral academy that was set up also by Michael Tilson Thomas. His vision, in terms of every instrument, but even, at least what I know expertly is that the percussion placement there of people in teaching and playing jobs is very, very, very high, exceptionally high. And, because of what it is, it's an opportunity to finally get and like have an apprenticeship in an orchestra, which is very common in Europe to get to do, but not so much here in the States. And, an orchestra of all people that are your peers that are hungry for the same thing, it's not a permanent position, right? It's a 3-year maximum. I think some exceptions of 4. But, for me, the idea was to get there and, get out of there as well. Not because I didn't like it, just because, I wanted to move on professionally. So yeah, in the middle of sort of the March of my second year. So towards the end of my second season there, flew up to Detroit, and I still have the audition booklet. I think I was like candidate 99 out of 100 some in their prelims, so they had 4 days of preliminary auditions, and then played the semis the next day and the finals the next day. And that's how it goes in this field. Sometimes I went from, Monday being in New World to Friday looking at apartments in Detroit and imagining a new life, sort of the like spin blindfold and point at the map, and here you're going to end up here, so, and I love Detroit, and that was a great place to be. So, but I didn't know that at the time. It was just, it seemed okay. This is where we're going,
Yeah. That's incredible. And, for my listeners and maybe people who aren't as experienced in the world of orchestral auditions, what is that experience like? I mean, you're playing a huge array of instruments, right? At a very high level, lots of excerpts on the instrument. I mean, there are a lot. It's quite a stressful moment in time to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, appropriate with the Olympics. Nice little shadow coming off my skylight here. I think I always make an analogy with the figure skating. You practice something tens of thousands of times, but then you have to do it under pressure at that moment. So with percussion, unlike violin or, my fiance is our harpist. The harp is great. I don't know if you can hear it in the background, but you're playing a singular instrument, right? And you show up with your instrument, right? Pretty much, timpani is another outlier here. Sometimes they play someone else's timpani, but percussion, a typical audition list for my job here, I think, you play snare drum, xylophone, glockenspiel, vibraphone, marimba, triangle, tambourine, bass drum, cymbals. Nowadays, as I mentioned earlier, you will see drum set sometimes, and it can be something as vague as 16 bars of rock, 16 bars of samba, 16 bars of up-tempo bop, brushes, ballad, 3/4 waltz, or they'll send out hits, a big band chart and say, okay, we're playing Invitation, and you got to be able to read this lead chart. That's not as common yet, but so for mine, there was no drum set, there was no castanets. I don't think there was any triangle on my audition, actually. I would say certain instruments show more to a committee of non-percussionists than others, if you see what I'm saying. I think sometimes playing the triangle for a couple violinists, and just truth be told, I think some they will tell you, like, I don't know, if it's in rhythm, and if everyone plays in rhythm, then everyone sounds good, right? Or everyone sounds bad. It's just there's no distinguishing characteristics like you maybe get on some of the other instruments. And that's not shade at the triangle. That's more just by itself. You could tell a heck of a lot more about how someone plays the triangle if they can play the note at the right time in a delicate ritardando in a Ravel piece, than you can by hearing them do it by themselves.
Right.
So
right.
So the audition itself is not with the orchestra until maybe a final round. So you start by playing anonymously behind a screen or behind a curtain or behind something that obscures your identity but doesn't stop the sound. So maybe not a curtain, but typically just paneling or something that blocks your identity from the committee that's listening. And you come on stage and you play, typically in a first round, you might play 8 to 10 minutes only of stuff. And if you do the math, you're moving between a few different instruments. That might be 2 short things on snare drum and 2 short things on a xylophone and a glockenspiel and a tambourine and a cymbals excerpt. And that's it in the preliminary round often. So of course, that's the round to me that feels the most like figure skating, where it's just like, all right, you've done this a million times, but you have to do it now. There's not really, weirdly enough, I'd say the farther you go in an audition, because you get to play more, typically there are less candidates. So you get to hear more from each candidate. And there's maybe a little more wiggle room for a technical mistake. Whereas I think a preliminary round, it's really hard for a committee to be super lenient on people who make mistakes when, of course, there will be a bunch who won't, right? Right. And they can't advance everybody in an audition. So it's really tough. I sometimes feel like that if you're out of that, the pressure's off, because then you can be a little more yourself as a musician and less of a like, there's still always this, whatever this is I'm doing. Right. People get the laser focus, like eyes bugging out of your head. I mean, I wouldn't be over exaggerating, hyperbolic to say it's a lifestyle. You get into this lifestyle of, taking auditions and practicing. I think the biggest turning point for me was really getting disciplined about a routine. Which kind of kicked in for me after I was a student when I got to New World. During my time at Juilliard for my master's was very busy time. I played in every opportunity I could, from new music ensemble to Axiom ensemble to, of course, percussion ensemble is very intense there. And I was playing in some outside bands too, because I was young and I was trying to do everything. Sure. And so I think getting to New World, getting down to Miami around, 3 other very like-minded people who I'm still really close with today. That got me in sort of just like we're going to set this up. I've known for a long time I should do this, but now we're going to actually do it. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I did not win my first or my 5th audition. I took a few, not too many. I have good friends and colleagues who have triumphed after 40, 50 auditions, a lot. And that's a testament to their work ethic and their desire to do this, and just how hard it is to win one of these jobs. It doesn't matter what or it could be it could be the Boston Symphony, or it could be a small municipal per service orchestra. You're going to get really qualified players nowadays that show up to any of these auditions. It just doesn't matter. Because I think people understand the privilege that it is to get paid to play music.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Yeah. I've talked with several percussionists on here that, like yourself, that make their living playing in an orchestra, and just the stress, the stress that goes along with just winning that job is crazy. And then to win the job, and then I guess sometime later decide that you're going to go and do it again, and then go and do it again. Right. Were you wanting to kind of work your way up, or do you like, all right, I got this one, but now I want to go do this one? Is that a personality thing, or was it a career goal?
That's, this is why I'm here to talk. I think it's an important part of my journey to explain and discuss why that happened. So the chronology sequence of events, I won that job in Detroit in March of 2010. I relocated there in June of 2010. And the orchestra went on strike in August of 2010. And it was a very bitter, long strike. Now, that same summer, or that spring rather, Richard Weiner, the longtime principal of Cleveland Orchestra, famous PAS Hall of Fame, amazing mentor for the time I was there. He retired, and that job came open. And that probably would not have been a job that I would have been invited to had I not just won that job in Detroit. But now I was a member of a large orchestra, principal member of a large orchestra. And so I got the invitation, and I sort of looked at it that spring and was lukewarm, not because, the Cleveland Orchestra is an amazing orchestra, but mostly I was about to start a brand new job, and sort of not wanting anyone to think I'm like already looking at the door and trying to do something else, because I was not. But the orchestra went on strike. So here I am in Detroit in the summer of 2010, sitting in my apartment, kind of wondering, okay,
what now?
Yeah. I didn't exactly have, years of income sacked away at that point. And so I auditioned for the Cleveland Orchestra out of, I guess, necessity. It felt like at the time, trying to think back that long ago. I know I wasn't going to, and then there was really no reason not to, everyone in Detroit was like, if I can be blunt at the time, they're like, get out of here, if you can go take that audition. Cause it was rough. And you know what? That orchestra's rebounded, and I've been back to play, and Detroit as a city is very different than it was 16 years ago when I lived there. Mm-hmm. I loved it when I lived there. It's really amazing to go back and visit. But that was a low point for the orchestra. I think everyone on both sides would agree that the summer of 2010 was not good. And that's when I started. So I went to Cleveland, took the audition in September. They did not hire anyone, but I was sort of there at the end. They just didn't hire me. Their call, the audition, they had the audition again. They invited me again in January of 2011. And that time I got the job, which was, again, this is less than a year after being at New World. So it was a big sort of like, okay. I guess we're doing this now. And so Detroit eventually came back, I think April of 2011. And I played a month and a half, basically, until I moved to Cleveland that summer. So I started that job in Cleveland with this much experience in all reality. I didn't have a full season really on paper I did, but that full season was 6 weeks max. So I got to Cleveland, and that's a big time job, and there's a lot of tradition there. And after 2 years, the music director let me know that I was not going to get tenure in that job, that I was, being let go essentially. That was in January of 2013. And, certainly was devastating news at the time, was not, I can answer the for people. It was not shocking. And certainly in retrospect, they made the right decision. I can say that to the world. I don't think I was ready for that job at that time in my life, particularly from a management / leadership standpoint. Just not equipped for that.
Because there's so much of that job that requires that part of it too, right? Part assignments, just the organization of equipment, all of that, right?
Yes, and I think to keep it on track here, I would say I could have done things differently. Some circumstances are outside of your hands, and I wouldn't trade those 2 years for anything, because I got that news on January 11th, 2013, and I was invited to the final round here in San Francisco with the symphony for June of 2013. And so I spent those next 5 months, to say motivated is an understatement. I gave myself a few days to feel it out, feel not good about the situation. And I decided, it's just my, maybe it's my Iowa upbringing, but I was just like, I'm just going to get up and do this. I'm going to see how this goes. There's no guarantees, but if I want this is a golden opportunity. I was going to take this audition regardless. I didn't feel like Cleveland was the best fit for me either. I think the feeling was mutual. I obviously didn't want to lose my job, but this looked like a more appealing everything for me at that time in my life. And I'm very happy I ended up out here. So those next 5 months, 4 months, whatever it was, I worked super hard, again, to say the least. Came out here, took the audition, and MTT called me one morning and let me know that this was going to happen. And so I relocated that summer kind of seamlessly. I played my last week at Blossom with Cleveland, said, see you later, and moved out here and have been here. Yeah. This is, in my 13th season. And
wow.
So, and on top of what I was saying earlier, and I'll come back to talk about a couple things, but next season, my fiance and I are actually having a duo concerto for harp and percussion written for us by a woman named Renee Orth. And so just the opportunities I've had out here between the Adam Schoenberg Commission, this commission, playing Xenakis, I don't think there's another orchestra, pardon me, that would have offered me this opportunity, that programs like this, that gives, the trust to program so much percussion stuff in the chamber music world. I just felt like this was going to be a better fit. And I think Cleveland is one of the best orchestras on the planet. And, I'm cool with all those guys in the section there now. It was a hard lesson, but it was the right lesson also for me.
I'm just so happy for you that you where you are and what you're getting to do. Just so many things. I watched a clinic. There's some video on YouTube of you doing a clinic with like a bunch of marching band kids. I think you're in a gym, like standing there playing snare drum. And I just was so I was so struck by how well you communicated the connection between the activity they were doing and how it transfers to what you do as an orchestral player, and just learning to use the metronome to make improvements in your time. And I think where you are and what you're doing, both as an educator and as a performer, I just feel like you're just doing great things, man. It's really, I just applaud that.
Thank you. I mean, I owe a lot of that stuff that I do in audition prep to the drum corps training, that do it again, put the metronome on off beats. Let's try it this way, move it once every 5 beats. Let's do it this way, and we're walking around like Tulsa, Oklahoma with a Dr. Beat in the back of our head,
Yep.
That's that. You never forget that, so.
No, you don't, I say that I think every musician needs to go and have that experience doing marching band or something, just to understand the time commitment, the discipline, just having to, bring yourself up when you're out there sweating your ass off, and, all of that. There's a lot of lessons and perspective to be gained by doing an activity like that.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Yeah. What year did you do? Were you in Colts? Is that what you did?
Yeah. I marched the 1998 Colts, where we made the finals in Orlando. We had a bus crash in Montreal that summer, which is pretty weird. And I played cymbals, and you watch videos of that summer, my students immediately are like, "Oh, you the really short one?" It's like, yeah, that's me. I just turned 15 that summer. So
15. Wow.
So, we don't need to talk about, I don't think they do this stuff anymore, but you probably know what I'm talking about. They made me do some stuff that I don't want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not terrible, but enough where it was like that. There's no way that stuff has to be okay anymore.
It's quite a different activity than it was back then.
That's good. Yeah. That's good to hear. I mean, I've been out to these clinics. I've seen what they're doing. It's really, I think the knock on it 25 years ago, if, for someone who's kind of popped in and out of it, was that it was all technique and not a ton of soul, and not, and I think that's not the case at all anymore. Hearing it, there's still all the crazy technique, but now there's some really sophisticated music stuff going on. And of course, just the physical activity of it is still super impressive. And the addition of electronics, I don't want to sound dumb here over my head, because I'm not an expert of where they're at right now. I'm just saying, to me, it's super impressive to hear it. Yeah,
no, I agree. Yeah. And just the level of playing, I mean, just some of the hands of these rudimental players, it's incredible. Yeah. What do you think? Do you attribute a lot of your success in the orchestral world, and you alluded to it earlier, but being a drum set player and just understanding that maybe playing from, there's so much about feel, and I think so much about playing from the heart instead of the head. And I think, when we're in the practice room learning all of these xylophone excerpts, there's so much mental part of it and maybe not as much feel. Do you think you had a little bit of advantage being a drum set player in that world?
The super biased answer, of course I do. I mean, I think that plus the drum corps, like I said, that super rude, when I remember getting to Northwestern, and I'd never done the Wilcoxon book for whatever reason. I'd done all the Pratt books, I'd seen a few of the things like Heating the Rudiments or whatever, but Burritt was the first person to show me the 150. And I was like, okay, yeah. I could do that pretty much in my sleep at that point because of all the drum corps background I had. But I was like, wow, this is like, I took calculus freshman year, but I never took algebra 1. It's like, what? I never looked at like, this is where this comes from. I just remember it was a huge jump the first time I went to Colts camp, and I tried out for the snare line. I was 14. I got smoked out of there. In no time, but because I couldn't read that stuff, I was like, what? And so, but by the end of that summer, I was hanging with all those guys. That's all I did. I still use that practice pad. It's right behind me. It is nasty. Check this thing out. That is from the summer of 1998 right there.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
That is a decaying practice pad. So, but yeah, I mean, more than anything, I think it's playing a piece like Shostakovich 10 and driving the bus with the snare drum. Timpani does this more often than the snare drum because they just play more in our repertoire. But a piece like Bolero, of course, where I can sort of corral the orchestra smoothly and not feel like, oh my God, they're not going with me. It's over. It's a disaster. You know how to make other people sound better. It's like wink, nod, like you didn't practice the metronome. That's cool. I'm going to help you out here. We're going to, a little bit like, it's like, oh, the drum line is like 30 yards away from me right now. We got to find a way to negotiate this. Same thing. Like you're playing a tune, somebody turns the beat around, in the middle of their solo, whatever, you're not going to be like, no, it's here. One is here. It's you, right. So I think you learn those skills of just adjusting on the fly, which I think that might be the hardest skill I see with young percussionists who come in. I'll typically have some of my second year grad students come and play like a kids concert with us. And over the years, I think the persistent things that get them, it's not playing the excerpts, which by the way, they're not going to play that anyway. They're going to come in and try to play bass drum or tam-tam and suspended cymbal. And it's just placing whole notes. It's placing a tam-tam note with a pizzicato in the bass and not having it be completely gone. And the conductor asks where the tam-tam is. And then the next time you destroy it and it's supposed to be pianissimo and it's early now. And so you're just like, because you didn't play tam-tam ever in the practice room. You played marimba solos all day or snare drum. Which you should, but my point is this feeling of like how to breathe, how to know how different instruments work. I think the ultimate chamber music for me, of course, percussion ensemble, but jazz quartet, jazz trio, there you don't have any music from the get-go, right? It's just like, bang, we're in, and you're listening, and it's the listening aspect where I tell students, it's like, you got to trust your ears, right? You have to, more than anything, this does not make any sound. And yes, we have to pay attention to what this is doing, whomever that may be. They're the boss, you always want to just, I teach students, this is what you say to conductors most of the time. That's zero words. It's the thumbs up.
0 words.
You're going to figure it out. Whatever they ask you to do. Yep. Got it. Yeah. There does not need to be a discussion on stage about like, well, actually the Becker blues, I think have a more, you're just like we're on the clock here, we're not talking about that stuff, so. But yeah, I think I feel that way, like big band drumming, especially when you're playing like a big Shostakovich symphony or you're playing a march in like a Mahler symphony and from, knowing how to play that in the pocket, right? Mahler has a pocket just like James Brown has a pocket, right? It's like, it's got maybe not the same, but that is kind of how I approach music, I think, is through a drum set lens. Oftentimes I'll tell students to, think of When the Levee Breaks or think of, something from that's more lighthearted than like think of the piccolo solo in Kiji and then play a perfect 4-stroke rough. That's to some people, that is not the idea of chill, it's like, so I found that sometimes just how you frame it too, because all of us have been playing 4-stroke roughs since probably 6th grade, right? Since we got our first rudimental book. But then when we have to do it under pressure, it's the figure skating thing, right? It's like now everyone's watching,
Yeah.
And so, I think a lot of the work I do with grad students is if they haven't played drum set, I have them learn just some basic, coordination, just, hi-hat on 2 and 4, ride cymbal pattern, the swing pattern, and then just basic vocabulary between the 2 feet to get that feel, being able to do this and feel comfortable playing under pressure, when you've got to play the Firebird on xylophone and it starts with digga digga dot and then 7 measures of rest, right? We have to feel that right in the pocket. But if we go digga digga dot to digga digga dot, well, already you've lost everyone, It's like, well, I played all the right notes. Well, no, but the feel was not there. And so I think I rely on that a lot under pressure, when you're playing by yourself. I tapped into that for audition taking. Back to that, I tapped into the drum set playing all the time. Yeah. So
that's fantastic. Do you find that when you have your grad students spend a little bit of time playing behind the kit, do you see the other parts of their playing start to improve immediately?
Always. To me, that's the cross-training analogy, because if you always shine the spotlight on something, the analogy I use is a lot of times people get really, really focused on their soft snare drum roll in a practice room with a ceiling that's 8 feet high and carpet on the ground. And it's, in a weird way, it's kind of good, because if you can get it to sound good in there, it will sound good anywhere. Right. But people, I think they might allocate their resources not efficiently, sound like an economist, to spend another half hour on that, when it's actually fine if they would just take it into the hallway or like the concert hall for 2 minutes after rehearsal and be like, oh, this sounds good. Okay, I can move on to something else. Or it sounds good enough for right now, but I really should do this other thing that I never do, like hit a tam-tam or something, play the cymbals for 5 minutes. I'm always telling students, it's like the cross-training analogy for athletes. They play some drum set and then they're not as focused on these, the technical process of their playing, which they can do. But when they think about it all the time, it makes them less apt to play in the pocket. They'll play conservatively in the sense that they'll play to not miss, and then it'll sound like a robot. Even if they play perfectly, it's usually pretty flat. It's usually pretty compartmentalized. And so, when I can get people to tap in for whatever reason, the drum set, for most people, for me, for sure, it's just a different lens. That's like, oh, this is a different type of music making. It's, I can tap into my improvisatory juices when I'm playing an orchestral audition, which might sound like the most, what am I trying to say? It makes no sense, right? The two most opposite things possible, right? But no, I think I was always, if I could, I'm going to make a phrase. If it's a pair of cymbals, if it's a tambourine, if it's a bass drum, and it's 20 seconds of music, and I can clearly demonstrate to you I can play this rhythm. They're usually not that hard. But now I'm going to make a phrase. It's these things where it's like, and you have to really exaggerate and really go for it and really have that commitment and have a mastery of how to play the cymbals and how to play the bass drum, which is a whole other podcast. Instruments that we don't ever do in lessons as students, that we focus a lot on in grad school here as well. But I think when they do the drum set stuff, it kind of takes the pressure off. It kind of makes them feel like, oh, it's okay to make a mistake. And then if you feel like it's okay to make a mistake, from what I've seen psychologically, you make less mistakes. You're not playing to not lose, you're playing to play, right?
Yeah. Well, and I would imagine too, these players stay in the practice room and they learn to play these excerpts, or they learn to play this passage the way they know how to play it. And the moment maybe the conductor gives them a little bit of feedback of the way they want to do it, there's like no flexibility, or they don't.
Yeah.
Being able to adjust on the fly has to be a huge skill that I also think comes with knowing how to just be loose behind a drum set. Yeah.
Yeah. I always tell students that critical moment, if you're in a major orchestra audition, any orchestra audition, if they take the time to work with you, that's always a good sign. That doesn't mean they don't like it. In fact, it's the opposite. It means they're actually spending time, they're interested. And now they do it's like the critical job interview. Like, okay, here's a scenario. So-and-so got billed for this, but it's incorrect. How do you refund them their money? Whatever hypothetical thing, right? This is like, okay, candidate, could you make that sound more like a sunrise? You're like, uh-oh, what the hell does that mean? What that means to me is do something different. Just do anything different. They're asking you, to me, my interpretation, can you do anything else? Can you show us something else? Are you willing, jump how high instead of jump? Well, but my teacher said to do it like, that's not, again, that's like the Becker Blue thing. It's like, no, don't, no. I think a great story. And my final audition here in San Francisco, I played around actually with the orchestra, which this orchestra does when you get it down to a super final round. So I played all those greatest hits, Porgy and Bess, everything with the full orchestra, which was obviously very telling. I'd had years of experience by that point. And then I played a typical orchestral excerpt round. And the final thing, that I played were 2 Bach marimba solos. I played the Gigue from the E minor lute suite, and then the final thing I played was the B minor beret, the violin partita. And I got done. That was the final. It was a lot of playing. I probably played 30 or 40 minutes. And MTT said, great, Jake, sounds great. Now, could I hear you just humor us? And could you play that with the backwards phrasing of what you just played?
Oh, my.
I knew him well already, so this wasn't shocking to hear. And so without hesitation, I just dove in and played. I've showed my students what I did. I mean, I don't have a marimba here at the house right now. Brad, I must have missed more than a dozen notes, by playing just kind of almost like over the top absurd, just like bam yum bam yum bam bam ba da dum bam 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 blah da bra da da dee dum ba 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 ba. Really, I mean, I wouldn't say I wasn't making a mockery of it, but I knew he was. I knew that this was just a test. I knew in that moment this was not like, oh, I don't like that phrasing, let's hear the opposite. It was more just like, hey, see what he does, see what you do, And I got done, and I honestly, I was somewhere, but I was drenched in sweat at this point, because then I was just like, did I just make a mockery? Did I totally blow this, or did I just put it out there? And like the committee clapped, and I was like kind of nervously laughing, like, yeah. And he was like, oh, I just wanted to see what you would do. I was like, okay, great, good to know. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the ability and also the willingness. And I think jazz players, that part of your brain, percussionists in general, I mean, they ask us, hey, can you fire a rifle in a piece? Yeah, sure. Can you, sure. But I think, I also teach the RJAM students, the Roots Jazz and American Music students at SFCM. They come, we'll do some snare drum etudes. I'm not their drum set teacher, but I can speak the language and, help them with some reading, help them with time stuff. And they'll read snare drum etudes. And I'll tell you, they will jump in and play with so musically, like, so, they'll play a Peters intermediate snare drum etude, just a good standard, dynamics and some flams or whatever. It may not be perfectly read, but it's the type of stuff I wish my classical students would hear and be like, hey, you can be musical always when you play this instrument. You can, listen to some Roy Haynes, listen to some Tony Williams, listen to some, any of these, like, understand it doesn't just have to be, there's got to be stability, but there's music there, right? It's a melodic instrument. Right. So yeah, sorry, long-winded answers, but
no, it's great. And I agree with you. I think there's so much of the culture, I think, too, of just focusing on the perfection instead of maybe the musical or the emotional attachment, the emotional part of playing of those parts. And I understand that playing them technically correct is important, but it's also supposed to be musical, and that sometimes I think it almost takes a back seat in some of these times.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like you were going to say it, but I mean, I think just learning to play by ear is a skill that,
yes,
weirdly, a lot of my classical students don't do. They, you ask them to improvise, and it's like you just ask them to, do something insane, right? Mm-hmm. And yet they'll play like entire Bach sonatas from memory. Okay, that's amazing. How about play a 30-second made up solo in E flat major? Go. Right? Or even worse, like play a drum solo. Anything. I don't care. It doesn't have to be in time. You can use your fingernails. We can put bed sheets all over. You can do whatever you want. And they won't. They won't do any, or they'll like play bolero or something. Or I'm like, no, not that. So.
Yeah. Well, it's really intriguing. Do you find that the same kind of percussion students are coming to you that you might have heard 10 years ago? Is the quality changing? Is the interpretation changing, or is it kind of standard fare on what type of players come to you?
I like this because I think I've heard some of my other colleagues answer this question too. And we talk about it sometimes. I think to me, I'm somewhere in between. I grew up with mostly internet, but I remember life without the internet. But YouTube, I think, was invented when I was a grad student, maybe after even. These kids have infinite resources. I remember waiting for my Gordon Stout CD to come from Steve Weiss Music in high school so I could hear Two Mexican Dances, so I could figure out what the hell was going on with that music so I could play it,
Yeah.
And now these students can go on, if they choose, to YouTube and hear infinity recordings of Rebond B or Yellow After the Rain or Chameleon or any Michael Burritt piece or whatever, which is great, sort of. I think we're sort of seeing the like carbon copy versions of some of this stuff sometimes that, down to like, if I hear a record, I hear someone play, I've listened to enough different Bach cello suites, but surely Yo-Yo's recordings enough time to hear direct ripoffs of that almost once a year by applicants playing something like that. Which again, that's impressive in its own way. I mean, he's amazing, right? But to me, it's just sort of like that says something about what we were just talking about, the soul part, the creativity part, the ownership, originality part, however you want to put it. So technical proficiency on especially the marimba is off the charts now. I mean, I see it all the time, whether it's listening to recordings for National Youth Orchestra or every year for Aspen, where I also teach the San Francisco Conservatory, any of these places where I hear, it's really, really, really like astronomically high marimba levels. And then the other things, it just depends. I would say this is not appropriate. We have we have a stereotype about the Texas hands. There's always kids from Texas that play snare drum, just like, Texas and snare drum and marimba, but timpani is the one that's still very elusive. I understand it's an access thing. Nobody really has Dresden pedal timpani in high school. I mean, I certainly didn't. But even just regular balanced action Yamaha or Ludwig or whatever timpani, it's just not an instrument that lends itself to being fun to practice. You got to get into the band room. It's just, so I understand that. So I haven't seen that level go way up yet at a younger age. I've seen like drum set phenoms. That's kind of always been a thing. Young kids who play in church or whatever that are just like unbelievable at the time they're 10 or 11,
Yeah.
But, I to this day, and this is why, I temper my students' expectations with this. I have yet to really meet a percussion prodigy when it comes to taking orchestra auditions, because nobody's really awesome at the triangle or tambourine when they're 19, because nobody cares. Nobody puts the time in on those instruments yet, I think if there's someone who cracks that code. Now, there have been some people who won auditions quite young, first year grad school, grad student, right out of undergrad. But that's definitely the exception to the norm, just because the consistency aspect of being able to play bass drum under pressure, odds are you've not really even practiced it hardly at all if you're a student. You know how it goes, but like your comfort level of that is probably a 2 out of 10 as opposed to the other stuff, whereas a more seasoned player. So, it's the kind of thing where there's always going to be gaps in the pedagogy. And of course, people who want to focus on marimba are going to do so. The way I run my studio here is I want everyone to do everything, so we do a ton of marimba, but also timpani and multi-percussion and percussion ensemble. And then the undergrads don't touch orchestral percussion until their junior year. I don't want them to learn the snare drum through Kiji. I want them to learn the snare drum and then be able to learn Kiji in a cinch, have it be easy. To me, it feels backwards sometimes to do it that way. To just teach the xylophone through Porgy and Bess. I'd rather them play some George Hamilton Green and some Harry Brewer and some violin transcriptions and some whatever on the instrument, so they don't just think of the xylophone as this thing where I can't mess up,
Yeah.
You don't walk up to it being like, Porgy and Bess, Appalachian Spring, whatever.
That's a beautiful way to approach it, though. I like that idea of it. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, Jake, I don't want to take any more of your time, man. I could sit here and listen to you talk, man. This is just, you just have wisdom flowing out of you. It's incredible to hear you talk and your perspective on these things. So
thanks,
I appreciate
Brad.
you spending some time.
I appreciate you having me on. I'm happy to talk about, I think just to touch back in the whole situation of me ending up here and, how my career ended up out here, it's never linear, I don't think. For a few people it is, and that's amazing. But, I think what I want people to take away to a certain degree is that I'm obviously very fortunate and lucky to have this position. And it wasn't just like, he waltzed, he took that one and won, and he took that one and he won, and he took that one and he won. And that's pretty awesome. No one can be like that. I mean, no, growing up in small town Iowa, no clue I could even be doing this as a career, until I was probably 15, honestly, until I had my summer in DCI and was around kids who were music majors. That was when I just, basically I was so naive. This is again, YouTube and all this stuff, or late 90s. I knew I wanted to be playing drums all the time, but I didn't know last thing I'll say, my high school band took a random trip to Boston for some reason in the spring of 1998. And we heard the Boston Symphony. And then that was the time. And it was Tim Jennis. He was not the timpanist yet. He was in the percussion section. They played Shostakovich 1, and he played that long snare drum roll that connects the third to the fourth movement. And I remember being like, that's the best. I've never, ever heard a snare drum sound like that in my life. I've never heard musicians sound like this in my whole life. Like, I remember asking my band director, I was like, so how often do they practice? He's like, oh, son, these are seasoned professionals. They get paid a lot of money to do this. I was like, okay, sign me up.
Well, I think it's a beautiful story. Your story of, you had moments of adversity and you turned it around, you did the work, and I'm just so happy for where you are and what you're doing. And I think you're in the right place, man. So I just appreciate what you do. So thanks for all of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Best of luck, Jake.
All right. Thanks.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow or subscribe to the Bandwich Tapes wherever you listen, and consider leaving a rating or review. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.